Is there like a Save the Libraries event or anything coming up that you'd prefer me to peg the video to or anything?
Well, we haven't really gotten together an event yet, but Emily Salyers, who lives in Atlanta, she's part of Indigo Girls. Her mother was a librarian and a children's book librarian, so really doing the Lord's work, and she passed away. And Emily and Amy are interested in doing a fundraiser to help raise money for the library system where she works. So we've been talking about that.
You thinking like, you don't know, like January?
I'm hoping next year. I don't know when.
Oh, so okay.
You know, and also when they perform, they have contracts that say they can't perform
within a certain region,
right,
a certain
right,
time.
Yeah. So,
well, what's your next tour engagement? What do you have going on right now? You're just winding up here.
Yeah, I'm doing some stuff here, but I've been working on my next book, The Truth About Pretty Girls.
Well, you're done, aren't you?
Almost done.
You're not done?
I have to go back and polish it a little bit. And
is it just they sent you the galleys and you're just playing with it?
No. It's still in the manuscript stage.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I thought they were done like ages in advance.
Well, it feels like it, but usually it's about 6 months.
So you're really under the gun because it comes out June 30th.
That's right. Yeah.
So it has to be done now.
Exactly.
All right. So Coptown is a standalone. Mm-hmm. Truth About Pretty Girls is a standalone. Mm-hmm. Obviously, you refresh yourself. You take no matter what you do, you can't make people happy. Because if you do a standalone, people are like, what about the? Okay. And if you do another one, it's just like, oh, I have to start with 15 books ago.
Right.
So obviously, the impetus was to keep it fresh and not to feel like you wanted to just keep turning. You wanted to take a breather. And fans might complain, but if they complain, aren't they actually a little sadistic? I mean, those poor people in Grant County. I mean, you're putting them through hell.
Well, yeah, and Will Trent has seen some really awful things too. And I do have, the books come out at different times in different countries, so I might go to Germany and they're still reading, a Grant County book. Yeah, and then, Will Trent, the current one, when I go to Holland or wherever, they're reading that, and no one's ever pleased. They all want more too, and I always tell them I need more than
4
5.
weeks.
Yeah, right. Because one a year is pretty intense for me.
My friend's mom is a huge British mystery fan. She'll let a murder, a body, an English accent. She said, "We're watching Inspector Gently right now. Mm-hmm. Great show, by the way." And like the second the series has ended, she's like, "Well, when's the next?" I'm like, "Well, they haven't filmed them yet.
Right,
you really have to have time." But Coptown is your current book. Amazon picked it as one of the best books of the year. Other lists will keep coming in, I'm sure, in the next few weeks. We'll see it on more lists. That's be very exciting, and it's a great intro for people like me who hadn't read you before. I'm one of those people I want to start at the beginning,
right? So
I need an excuse to start because I got 15. And that book is a great way to jump into what you do. Now, all your books you can be read, at anyone. You provide enough context that you can start in any book anywhere, but there's a lot more satisfying, I think, if you start at the beginning.
I feel that way, but a lot of people jump around, and that's good. I write them so that they can do that. But with Coptown, I wrote a book 3 books ago in the Will Trent series about women during this time period, and part of the 1970s crime had something to do with present day in Will Trent's life. Yeah, criminal. And I had all these stories these women had told me that were fascinating about being a young woman in the 1970s, and I really wanted to talk more about that. And, it seemed like a good thing to do. And also, the Will Trent series is at a point where it's going to have a fresh restart because some stuff was resolved in the last book.
Right.
And so I thought, well, I'll go to Coptown, and then my next book, The Truth About Pretty Girls, is a standalone, and I'll do that, and then I'll go back to the Will Trent series and tell a bang-up story.
Truth About Pretty Girls is not set in the past, right? But it does have a lawyer as a protagonist.
Actually, no, it didn't work out that she was a lawyer.
I read that at some point.
Yeah, you did.
What does she do now?
That's the problem with talking about a book when you're in the middle of it. Well, she's a dog groomer, so close.
Okay. But it's not a cozy.
No, it's not.
It's not where the dog helps her solve the crime and all that sweet. No.
But it's about 2 sisters, and something really horrible happens, this being a thriller. And the sisters are estranged, and the crime brings them back together. It's my first novel that doesn't have police officers as the lead, so that was a new challenge for me.
Because?
Well, when you have police officers, you can have them be the detectives, and they can talk to a lot of people, and they're kind of omniscient in the story, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of action comes from that, and it's actually easier to do it with police officers because you have to figure out, okay, well, here's a housewife and a dog groomer, and how am I going to figure out how they're going to be connected to this crime, and
to solve it and
exactly,
work on it or be
yeah. So basically, when that kind of thing happens, usually it's just some normal people who have landed in some really bad circumstances.
Well, Coptown is set in 1974. You have a lot of people in it, of course, but two main female protagonists, Maggie and Kate. Maggie's the veteran cop whose family is blue collar. They're cops through and through. They're blue bloods in the sense of cops. And Kate is a blue blood in the sense of she comes from an upper class family and she wants to be a cop for reasons we learn more about when the book progresses. And she's the newbie, she's the rookie, you see her getting hazed, but you also see a lot of things from the 70s, the stories you heard about how women were treated by men on the force. They were completely not wanted. And once, I don't know if this was in the book, but you mentioned, you heard from female police officers that when people saw them in a cop car, they would call it in and think a woman had stolen a cop car because they couldn't think of why she'd be in a car.
Well, that's true. I read that in the Atlanta Journal. The biggest complaint that was a non-emergency was a woman saying, I just saw a woman steal a police car. Because that's right. It was more believable she'd be a car thief.
But it's not just hazing, and it's not just, hey, Toots, get me some tea. This is like sexual harassment and, like assault. They're literally sometimes scared about the partners that they're with.
Yeah, and the women I spoke to were, a lot of times they would go in pairs everywhere they went. They had to be really careful of their surroundings. One woman was almost raped by her boss, and she was saved by what we call the guardian angels in Atlanta. And these were African Americans who were so disgusted that the police weren't policing their communities, that they weren't vigilantes, that's what they were called. They were trying to help.
Stoppers.
Exactly. And if not for them, her boss would have been raping her. They interrupted that.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's just they were in the street or something.
Exactly. Yeah, he had her in the car.
Oh, okay. Wow. And even like you talk about veteran cops defecating in their locker, or on the car that they're going to have to take out,
or their purses.
I don't remember seeing that on Cagney Lacey.
No, they didn't have it that bad, did they?
No, not as bad. But
that was the 80s too. Women in the 80s still had some problems, and women now have problems. So what I really wanted to show was, look, this is how bad it can be if we're not vigilant about these things. And not all men back then were horrible, because honestly, men had all the power, and women couldn't have taken that power unless some men decided to give it up. And that's what happened. A lot of men who were in the police force saw that women could do a good job. They saw the positive changes that women brought to policing. One of them that's very important is de-escalation of violence. Before women were in policing, men would just meet violence with violence because that's what they were trained to do. Women, we're smaller in stature. We can't really do that. Certainly, with a gun and the right baton, you can beat the crap out of somebody. But what women did was they would talk to people. They would de-escalate the situation. They would get them in the car. They would handcuff them, all those things without violence. And from the 1970s to the 1980s, you saw a 90% drop in suspects going to the hospital because women were just not going to be doing that.
And they were also eyes and ears when somebody else did it.
Exactly.
If they weren't into it.
Exactly.
You couldn't get away with it as much.
Right.
The other guy wasn't egging you on.
Right.
Well, you talk about the de-escalation of violence and women not doing that. I mean, you just have that horrible story of that kid in a schoolyard, not playground. And the cop is out of the car and shoots and kills within 2 seconds of the car stop. And you think, you want cops who are, unfortunately, they have to be willing to die.
Right.
But sometimes you worry about cops being, ready to kill.
Right.
To do their job, and an us against them mentality.
Yeah.
But you talk to a lot of cops, you know how hard the job is.
Right, and I'm not going to say that women are perfect, because they're women. I mean, I think one thing about being a cop, it's the same thing about being a journalist, You have a certain level of chagrin about celebrity that the average person might not have, because you've probably met with celebrities, so you know that they have their faults, whereas someone who just reads People magazine and thinks they're great probably wouldn't. Teachers, every, I think, person who deals with the public has some sort of us against them attitude, and it's not necessarily hostile, but it's just this understanding that sometimes you see people on a really bad day. And, I just flew up from Atlanta to New York, and it's amazing how crappy people can be to flight attendants, because you think, if something goes wrong, she's going to save your life or not, I'm going to be the one who says, yes, ma'am, and thank you, because I want to get to the door first.
Oh, I don't need peanuts.
Exactly, yeah, let's just watch the door.
Yeah, but it is amazing how much policing has changed over, and you're talking to cops and you're interviewing them all the time for these books. And you're going back to 1974, which you were just a baby then. Your birthday's in January, right? How do you celebrate your birthday? You do anything big? Do you throw a party for yourself?
I'm going to St. Martin.
Oh, very
so
nice.
that's nice.
That
yeah,
is nice.
where it's warm.
Get yourself a gift. Well, it's always warm in Atlanta, basically.
Well, you know, the thing about Atlanta is it can be really cold. It was 22 last week, but when I left, it was 60. So it's menopausal weather, but in a good way.
Well, I have friends in Atlanta and family in Birmingham where Jeffrey started his career, and I grew up in South Florida, so I'm excited about the cold.
Yeah.
I think it's exciting. Oh my God, the season's changed.
All right. It's the unrelenting part of it that gets to me.
So some people think, oh, you grew up in the 70s, but you were a baby in this period, so you don't remember it in that sense, and so you really are doing research. Is it? Do you feel like, oh, I could set a book in the 1870s or the 1770s, or is there something about the early 70s that keeps pulling you back in because it's sort of in your memory a little bit?
Well, it was such a tumultuous time, you know, and so many changes happened during that time, good and bad. You know, if you look at our repressive drug sentencing laws, that started in the 1970s.
Thank you, Nelson Rockefeller.
We're right, yeah. And the way we punish people has completely changed. And, you know, there has to be a correlation between the civil rights movement and the escalation of African Americans in prison. You know, I mean, it's like there's people who are in power are going to find a way to stay in power, and that was a very useful thing to imprison people who were threatening that power. So, you know, that's just a few of the things that I talk about when I'm writing about the 1970s, and it's something I'm sort of familiar with. I know all the cartoons and the jingles and the commercials and, you know, Irish Spring soap and things like that. I remember those, but the politics, I had no idea. I mean, I was a little white girl living in the suburbs.
What mayor came into power.
Exactly.
And brought in people with him and what changes were happening, because that's part of Coptown as well.
Absolutely. You know, the most interesting thing to me was that, not Maynard Jackson per se, but certainly the mayors, indicted and not, who followed him, they did the same thing to poor people that white people did to poor people when they were in power, which is section them off, you know, and protect their wealth. And that's a really interesting thing to me, because I think it just proves that once someone gets a foot up, they don't necessarily reach back and help someone else. They're more interested in, okay, well, let me keep my base. And I think that's one thing that was really fantastic about Maynard Jackson, is he did not have that point of view. He wanted to help everybody. He wanted to work with the white community. He didn't want to punish them for past ills. And he really sent that message to his staff. He also wanted to make sure that women had a voice in politics, which before it was not very inclusive. And one of the women who worked for him, Pearl Cleage, told me an amazing story. She's a Southern writer. She's really an amazing woman. But she was his director of communications. And when Maynard Jackson won this massive big election in Atlanta, and you know, it was a really groundbreaking thing for an African American mayor of any city, really. Yeah, a guy in Detroit who was later indicted, and Maynard Jackson were the first two African American mayors of any major American city. And so she gets a phone call from Ebony magazine, and the guy says, okay, well, I need to get a quote about this. This is amazing. This is earth-shattering. We've got to have a quote. And she starts to give him a quote, and he says, wait a minute. I need to talk to a man, because it just wasn't valid to him to have a woman give a quote. And she's the director of communications, and she said, well, if you can't talk to me, you can't talk to anybody. And she hung up on him.
Nothing changes. When you grew up, of course, there's Atlanta child murders, and that sort of loomed over. Is that when your fascination with crime started? Or did that sense of unease, or was there something before? Were you always into it? I mean, P.D. James just died. Yeah, a great writer, and she has a great quote that when she heard about Humpty Dumpty falling off the wall, she wondered, was he pushed? Did he fall accidentally? What was going on there? So, I mean, you know, I'm
sure I had that in me. And my father loves dark stories. And when I was growing up, you know, he always told us cautionary tales, like the little girl who left open the refrigerator door and died, or the little girl who touched the thermostat and died. But, you know, he had 3 daughters to keep up with, so he had to rein us in somehow. And I think being the youngest of 3 girls, you know, I'm very accustomed to violence, being the youngest, and my sister's beating up on me. Oh, so you know, yeah. And also that the most loved is the youngest. Right. But you know, the Atlanta child murders, I think, gave me an understanding that violence changes communities. because it really changed my life when this started happening. This was the late 70s, 79, 80.
But I would have thought, you don't think rationally, but I would have thought people were like, well, you're not a little black boy, and so you're probably not in danger.
Well, it's true that you would think that. I'm not the demographic,
Right.
certainly, but it was just frightening to think as a kid of other kids being targeted. And it did change the community because it was the great unknown. I mean, if you think about Ebola, for instance, look at how terrified people were of that, and the chance of getting probably abducted by a serial killer were greater than getting Ebola.
And still the governor of New York can be an idiot.
Right, exactly. Well, that's the luxury of being a politician. But, I mean, if you have a child, you're much more likely that the child will be molested by a relative than a stranger, but people are more terrified of strangers. I mean, so... Right, so there's the statistics, and then there's what your gut feeling is, and we were really terrified, and I wasn't allowed to go down a certain street anymore. I couldn't ride my bike after dark anymore, and our parents were always checking on us. I mean, it sounds like you had a very similar Southern upbringing to me.
Well, South Florida isn't the South. It's really
well,
North.
that's true.
Pompano,
That's
Fort
true.
Lauderdale is where I grew up.
Okay,
so
well, North Florida maybe.
Yeah,
but when we went out during the summer, my parents, right, and they locked the door because they didn't want us back in the house, and they said if we get thirsty, there's the garden hose, and that was perfectly fine. Everybody on the street had that. We weren't allowed to go back in the house.
And you were in a small town. You weren't in Atlanta proper, were you?
Right, I was in a place called Jonesboro, which is 40 minutes away, and it used to be a really small town, but now it's big. My dad said it went to hell when we got the shopping mall. Well, he was right. It just brought in a lot more people and a lot of industry and that kind of thing. But it was a very small town. And if I rode my bike to the library and I did something I wasn't supposed to do, by the time I got home, someone had called.
Yeah. Which is a lot of part of the Grant County. That's a college town.
Absolutely.
Or college county, I guess.
Yeah.
And it has that feel for it that everybody's watching everybody else in good and bad ways.
Not closely enough, though, because there's a lot of murders there.
Yeah, why anybody would live there is beyond me. That's the perennial question, why the hell don't they move?
Yeah, well, that's why I moved everything to Atlanta with Will Trent, because I just thought, how long are people going to put up with this?
No, they're going to just burn the town down. It's a hell mouth, like Buffy. Did your dad tell bad jokes? Does your dad tell bad jokes? Is that not him?
Well, he does sometimes.
Because you have them peppered through.
I do, but that's more my love of it. I just love. I don't call them bad jokes, but I love jokes.
And puns, which is truly the highest or lowest.
Highest, I think.
Highest.
Yeah,
okay.
Absolutely.
And so that's people must give everybody you meet gives you one. You get them handed to you now. I imagine.
They do. Since I haven't written Grant County, I stopped after 6. They do pile up, but people still send them, and it's weird because I got one from Croatia that was supposed to be a pun, but it didn't translate that way.
And your dad owned a car dealership. Was it new or used?
He had new and used.
Because was it the only one in town or the only one nearby?
No, he worked in the big city, and he worked for other car dealers when I was growing up, and then he opened his own place as I got older. So he's seen a bit.
And did he have his slogan? I mean, was it something, was it literally like our prices will kill you?
Something like you can trust him. I think that was about
Slaughter,
it.
Slaughter.
I know, right? He missed all those
Motors?
opportunities. No. But, growing up with that last name, none of us ever thought anything remarkable about it. It was just our last name. So the idea of it being a marketing tool, for instance, for me was just, oh, okay, well, I can see that, but...
Well, when I have friends who lived in Birmingham, who lived in Champaign-Urbana, Illinois, and when you drive there, somewhere around Indiana or Illinois, is a series of road signs for an RV company, Raper RV. Raper, come to Raper. And you're like, you don't want to use your first name.
Right.
Yeah,
especially for RVs.
Yeah, they're determined.
Right.
We're the Raper RV.
Yeah.
So that's the one you want.
Yeah. Serial killers use RVs a lot, so that could be a great tie-in.
Do they really?
Yeah.
Like as opposed to the van in the 70s?
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same idea.
Yeah.
Oh, that's nice. A portable home. Yeah, so that wasn't... so your dad, car dealership, you
nothing scary.
Nothing scary, nothing good, no. He didn't have no slogan, nothing like that. Was he one of the good car dealer guys, I assume?
I'd like to say so. In the 70s, there was a guy named Mike Thievis who was called the Scarface of porn. He was wanted by the FBI eventually, but every peep show booth in the country was owned by this guy.
Oh, wow.
And he couldn't be mobbed up because he was Greek, he wasn't Italian, but he was kind of an honorary made man because he had so much money that he made from porn. And my dad would sell cars to him. And what would happen was he would get a call and say, hey, this commissioner or this guy who is going to approve some permits for this building I want to build is going to come pick out a car. And my dad would give him the car, and then Mike Thievis would pay for it.
Wow. We are all criminals at heart, of course. We've all made mistakes, or we've done. My first crime was stealing cigarettes. We wanted to smoke, so of course we couldn't buy them because we were too young. We were like 14, so we stole them from the 7-Eleven. What was your first crime?
Assault.
Assault?
Yeah.
Against your siblings?
Yes.
Does that count really as a crime?
Well, I broke my sister's leg.
Oh, that does count. In anger?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I guess you want to hear the story.
Yeah.
I was actually telling this at lunch because we were comparing all the awful things that siblings do to each other. And I always win because it's really terrible. But my sister had stolen my Charlie's Angel Kate Jackson trading card. And I told her if she didn't give it back, I was going to stand on the arm of the chair and jump on her leg and break it. And she didn't give it back. So this is a lesson. I always do what I'm saying I'm going to do.
That sounds like you could totally get off, though.
Oh, yeah,
yeah.
Well, we never told because we never told on each other. It was all, I'm going to save this and tell on you unless you do something. So I did a lot of things for my sister. I was basically an indentured servant.
Yeah, my brother's just bullied my other brother into, he'd hurt himself playing football. Like, come on, I'll be a baby. Turns out he has a broken collarbone.
Right.
They don't find out for 10 days. Broken arm,
Yeah.
So that's just sort of, you just keep going. You've got to grit it out.
That's right. Walk it off.
So that's your first crime.
Yeah.
And obviously you're reading growing up. The library you love. Was the library where you went as a kid? I hated the library because I didn't want to give the books back.
Well, that's a good point. I was, first we had the bookmobile.
Right.
And the driver was the bus driver for our school. And she hated me because she hated my sisters. Really, my middle sister was the big troublemaker. Literally, the first time I got to ride the bus, I was so excited. And I got on and she looked at me and she said, I know who you are. And she made me sit in the front of the bus the whole time.
She couldn't trust
you. She was really mean. And it was silent bus every day.
Oh.
I know. So that's the kind of woman she was. But she drove the bookmobile, and I love books. So I would go and pick out books, and she was a chain smoker, so they always smelled of nicotine.
Did she stand outside smoking away while you were inside?
No, she was inside.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that was my first entree into the book world. And my sisters would do mean things like put gum in the book.
Oh, my God.
So I would get in trouble. And I did break her leg. But
Put damage in a book. That's worse.
I know, right? That's the real crime. But then we moved and there was a permanent library. And that was just nirvana to me. And it was amazing. And the librarians there were amazing. So brilliant, so well educated. They were kind of the boss of the library. And that was a revelation, being a young girl in a small town where women didn't control anything. Exactly. And I mean, they just really, they knew what I wanted to read before I knew. And they gave me all these great suggestions, and there were great contests because I was really competitive, so I had to read the most books and things like that.
When did they surprise you with the book? You said they knew what you wanted to read, so it wasn't like, now you want this other girly book. Here's, I love Anne of Green Gables, whatever, but there's, you like Little House Fairy? It's time for Anne of Green Gables. It's time for Little Women. When did they say, I know what you want.
They did, and, they actually pushed me into sci-fi and to mysteries and all kinds of books, not just one thing. And I think that's pretty amazing because, you would think little girl, Anne of Green Gables, but they also gave me Hardy Boys, and not just Nancy Drew and all kinds. And, frankly, the Hardy Boys got better crimes.
Nancy, there's a pile up of murders. Why don't you come spend the weekend? And see
Exactly, yeah.
A little odd.
Yeah, and her father's always there to bail her out. But they really just expanded my mind in a way that it would not have been expanded at that age.
Mm-hmm. But everybody loves librarians. You dedicated one of your books to librarians. Obviously, every writer has a debt because that's where readers are born. But when did you decide to take more action? Because you have your campaign called Save the Libraries, where you both work to raise money for the DeKalb County Library System and encourage others to do it in their town.
Yeah, and I think that's the important thing because it would be really easy for me to say, hey, give all this money to my system. But I think if people focus on local systems, their system down the road, that can benefit them immediately. You're not just throwing money into some nebulous organization. You're actually seeing, hey, they got to paint the building this year, or the lights are on, or the hours have changed.
They're not closing at 4
exactly.
on Thursdays.
Right. And in DeKalb, it was really sad because the elevator broke and it wouldn't go to the top floor. And then they couldn't afford air conditioning, which, in the South, people can't survive. They'll literally die without air conditioning.
In the stacks.
Yeah, exactly. And so for many kids, their only access to internet is at the library. And in rural areas, 80% of kids, their only access to reading and the internet, which is really important for other things other than, just the fun stuff, is the library. Mm-hmm. So, they don't have it at home. They don't really have a way to get to school when school is closed in the summertime to expand their minds or to look at things online. If you want to work at Walmart or Target, you have to apply online. If you want a job, you have to have a computer to do a resume. So there are things libraries have.
And when you get that job at Walmart, you need to be at the library so you can apply for food stamps because your salary isn't up. But that's another story. But what made you what gave you the kick in the pants to do something?
Well, in 2008, I was at the American Library Association's annual meeting, and authors love doing it because it's great. It's quiet. They drink a lot, but they don't get loud. But it's a great event to go to, and I had been to it many times before. And I got there when the economy crapped out, and half the people I was used to seeing weren't there because they couldn't afford to come. Mm-hmm. And many of them pay their own way, but some of the systems pay their way.
Or help,
right? Costs, and that help wasn't there. And not just that, but some of the great older librarians were being asked to retire early. And, these women have a lot to teach. Being a librarian isn't just putting a book on the shelf. I mean, there's so much more to it, behind-the-scenes stuff that really requires a master's level knowledge, which is a librarian science master's, that they need to have in order to run a library. I mean, it's a small business.
And it's a hugely challenging one, too,
exactly.
With all the changes in formats and people.
Exactly. And, libraries have always been at the forefront of that kind of thing. You've got libraries now that are renting out tools to people, right? Mm-hmm. And Ray Bradbury, when he was a struggling writer, he rented a typewriter for 10 cents an hour at his library. So that's a really important thing libraries have always done. And $1 invested in the library returns $5 to the community. And a kid who reads does better in school. He gets a better job when he's out of school, or he goes to college and he gets a better job, and then he pays higher taxes. So it's like a win-win return.
And people should pay attention to your website, KarinSlaughter.com, because you're going to have an event next year, hopefully with the two women from the Indigo Girls to raise money, another benefit concert, an event. Will you sing?
You know what? We could raise a lot of money if I don't. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'll say I'll sing unless you give a lot of money.
But you like music.
I do. I love music, yeah. Well, I come from Atlanta, so.
Mm-hmm. What are you listening to right now?
I'm actually listening to All About the Bass, and it's one of those songs that has gotten in my head, and I can't get it out. You wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, and you're singing it in your head. So, actually, I hate that song right now. I love the new Beyonce song. I love Indigo Girls, Leonard Skinner, classic rock. It really depends on what book I'm writing on. Like for Coptown, I listen to a lot of Linda Ronstadt, Rolling Stones.
Just getting that dangerous '70s vibe.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah.
So not the new Dolly Parton. It has a good Dylan cover. And
I love Dolly Parton, actually.
Well, I know. But I'm assuming, because you mentioned her a couple times.
Oh, so, yeah.
And I have a friend whose name is Jolene, and she hates the song Jolene.
Really?
But she's like, well, Jolene is evil. Jolene is, So she doesn't like that song, but of course it's a great tune.
I do. I love it. Dolly Parton is amazing. She's a businesswoman. She employs an entire town with Dollywood.
And she has a great literacy program.
She does, to get books to kids. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because she understands, it's a scientific fact. If children don't learn to read by a certain age, they will never master that skill. Literally, the brain will not develop the pathways for that kind of thinking.
It's so much easier to learn when you're young, obviously.
Exactly.
New languages or a skill like reading. But what do you think of, I don't want to give me that one, but what do you think of the old mass market?
I love mass markets, As I've gotten, let's just say beyond 30, I wish that they were bigger.
But you're not in trade, and I wondered how you felt about trade versus mass markets. A lot of writers don't even have mass market for a long time, if ever, and they're told, oh no, trade is where all the excitement is,
I don't agree with that. But I do have books in trade, and they're relaunching some more in trade this year. I like a paperback because I travel a lot, and I supplement it with my reading device. But every time I'm at an airport, I see a book, and I always buy something. And it's great to just be able to put that in your case and keep going.
Would you ever pay attention to would you be worried about if they put something out in trade that they wouldn't be available in mass market as well, or something like that? Is that
I think
stuff
I
on your
would
radar?
be. Yeah, just because I want all the formats to be available to my readers. That's why one of the big things for me is audio, because I have an uncle who's sight impaired, and so I'm really aware that there are a lot of readers out there who don't have access to quality books because they just don't get adapted for audio or for large print. And so all my books are in large print. That's something I'm really proud of, and I really am an advocate for that, because I just think anytime anybody's reading anything is great.
It's a great thing about the reading devices.
Oh,
especially
absolutely.
with people, that you can just change the font. It makes it hard to create the right format. You can't
Right.
do poetry, but what I love about mass market is they're almost, in a way, disappeared, except for people in certain genres.
Right.
So it's really hard to find authors in mass market, and I'm like, I don't know anybody who wants to pay more for the same book. It's
Right.
like Trey versus, I feel like it's the single of the book world.
No,
Like,
that's true,
They
yeah.
got rid of the singles for a long time. You couldn't
Right.
even buy a single. And that's a great way for people to step into books, especially if you've got a series. You've got books that are 50, 60 years old, and they're not available in mass market, and they're asking for $16, and it's a 20-book series. I think,
Yeah.
what the heck?
Yeah.
But it's a whole
That's
new
why the
world.
library's so great.
That is why libraries are great, but it's so hard for them to keep all the formats in place.
True.
Yeah, I guess hardcover really is the one that lasts the longest.
It does, and they do all kinds of studies about that, which lasts longer and
I
replacement.
haven't looked at your audiobooks. Do you read them, or do
Oh,
you have somebody
no.
that you love that does them? Or
Kathleen Early it reads them, and for years I wasn't happy because the southern accents were a bit foghorn leghorn. And I write about a woman who went to basically the Ivy League College of the South, Emory University, and she's very well educated and articulate, and she sounded like she just dropped out of a trailer park. And Kathleen totally gets that. I remember when I kind of interviewed her, I was in Holland and she lives in California, but she was raised in Savannah. And we had to schedule this phone call in the middle of the night, and I'm standing there in a hotel room in Holland in my pajamas, half asleep, and I heard her voice, and I thought, okay, she totally gets it. And I think she does a really good job. I mean, and she's not afraid to ask if there's a word she doesn't know how to pronounce, because like mobile versus mobile, or Calliope versus Calliope, so we have to make sure the words are pronounced correctly.
that's why, like GPS, I put on a British accent, and every once in a while they pronounce a street or something name. Instead of drive, they say doctor. It's a very nice little surprise. Well, the exciting thing for your work is how well it does all over the world. And of course, in one country you'll be literary fiction, in another country you'll be crime fiction, in another country you'll be thrillers. You're just happy, of course, people are reading the books, but that's where you've sold 30 million copies around the world. Did you didn't think about that when you started?
Never.
You're hoping to get published, right?
Well, and honestly, most writers, when they start out, they only think about their local bookstore. Maybe they think about Amazon now, but, I thought, oh God, please let them have 2 copies, because I know that my dad's going to buy one, and maybe a stranger will buy the other one. So it never occurred to me the international scope, especially for thrillers. I mean, they're the most popular genre worldwide. But I didn't know that much about it. And to tour in other countries is amazing.
Do you see any changes, like as far as the industry, as far as like selling books by language rather than territory? Because that just seems the natural progression of things. Right now, people buy books for England or France or Australia or Germany or Spain or Japan. And it seems like in a few years, I don't know what your contracts are like, but they'll be saying, I'm going to buy the English language rights to your book, because it's so easy to get them available worldwide and get them out there.
Right. Yeah, I think that digital rights are hard, and I mean the record companies are saying this, but what I also know is that it seems like e-readers have kind of topped out, and it's just another format.
No, English language, not digital.
Right.
But
Well, but English language, and if you think about it, like when I go to Singapore or New Zealand or Australia, my publisher there, my English publisher, has already these colonial distribution networks set up, and it was really hard for another country or another, like the United States, to go in and say, we're going to start distributing here. And also there's the global aspect, because Bertelsmann owns Random House, and they publish me in Australia and Germany, and so they're going to want to keep those territories separate. And I think publishers still, they know what they're doing. And I think that they know their markets, because I wouldn't want my American publisher, who's fantastic in America, to try to publish me in Holland.
or Finland. What do
Or
they know?
Finland,
Yeah.
exactly. Because, if you look at, I have a lot of different jackets from my books around the world on my website. And you would look at my Dutch ones and think that it was chick lit, or not even that, like literary fiction, or, you know, like Olive Kitteridge or something like that, which, you know, was fantastic. I wouldn't mind being compared to that. But it's not how they would market me here. It's just the markets are very different, and you have to be local to understand that.
What's been the